Framtidens E-Handel, Sveriges ledande podcast inom retail och e-handel, sponsras denna vecka av betallösningar från Svea. Vill ni växa er e-handel? Sveas checkout ger kunderna full flexibilitet och leder till fler slutförda köp. Med personlig service och sömlösa betalningar kan ni erbjuda de bästa betallösningarna, oavsett kanal. Upplev skillnaden med personliga betallösningar från Svea. Läs mer på svea.com/payments.
Hej och varmt välkommen till ett nytt avsnitt av Framtidens E-Handel. Mitt namn är Björn Pommas Benger. Idag ska vi prata om performance marketing med en snubbe som jag har känt sjukt länge, som jag har jobbat med sjukt länge. Jag vet att han är en av de bästa i Europa inom just det här. Han har managat en ad spend på över 1 miljard kronor, alltså en ads spend, inte intäkter. Intäkterna är betydligt mycket högre. Han har jobbat med brands som Kaja Cosmetics, som Stronger, som vårt varumärke Mikuta. Och det här ska bli ett extremt spännande avsnitt för att lära oss hur performance marketing funkar idag och vad du ska göra här och nu för att lyckas bättre med det. Varmt välkommen till podcasten. Welcome to the podcast, Arnas Jacevicius.
Yeah, that's good.
That was hard saying your name, man.
Yeah, I know. That's why, I would never wish to anyone to say that is not Lithuanian.
You flew in from Lithuania yesterday to Stockholm because I basically forced you to come here.
Yes.
You missed your flight. What happened?
It was extremely intense past week that I had. And then, I just bought the flights, to fly here. Then I decided to fly from Kaunas, not from Vilnius, in which I live. And I didn't do the check-in the night before. And then I went to the desk and asked, can you check me in now? And they said, no, you are late 15 minutes. The registration is closed and nothing we can do. So then I got out of the airport, then got in a car, drove back to Vilnius, and then flew from Vilnius with another flight here.
Good to hear that you're finally in Stockholm then. Why was your past week super intense?
We got a really serious lead. It's a company that makes around 100 billion euros per year. So it's publicly, traded company. When you are that size of a company, you have a bunch of brands under your umbrella, right? In different sectors. And for the first time, they want to create something new, but using performance marketing. And then they reached out to us.
And the deal is not final yet.
No, it's not final yet. You connected me before, but some of also a really huge business, from Sweden, a very corporate one. So that it's very different when you pitch to corporate than you pitch to e-commerce businesses, I'm very straightforward. So when some leads come in, I'm just comfortable saying, look, guys, your website is total shit, obviously you're not going to make money having that. I feel comfortable saying that because, in e-commerce, it's more freely, but in corporate, I realized that it's going to be way more difficult, to explain to them. You had to educate them about what is performance marketing, and they try to test you and challenge you on random shit, because in their head, they just need to decide. There's multiple decision makers. It was just really intense to prepare a pitch deck, then hop on a call, present that pitch deck, get those challenges from them, and so on and so on.
But you could also take on such a challenge with a Dalai Lama mindset. You're smooth in the body, you're chill, you're still doing the tasks, you're still executing the shit you gotta execute, you're still doing the presentation, but you feel good. Why didn't you feel good?
There were some external factors. The way that my brain works is that I'm shitty when it comes to execution. And I figured that out before. I was trying to understand why I cannot do these things that others do. I don't function like others function. But then I realized that, my strength lies in the strategic thinking, problem solving, creating a vision for something. So here it was the same stuff. I had really clear vision, how the pitch deck has to look like, what information it has to include, how it has to be translated, what every slide has to talk about and what meaning it has to have. But I don't know how to execute and make it look beautiful and make it look presentable. So Domata said, okay, he will do it because he's really good at execution, and taking my ideas, and he understands what I mean and how to implement them. But he got sick. So then on Thursday, I had to send the pitch deck. On Wednesday, 4 p.m., I didn't have anything yet. And then, you had to find and,
And Domantas, I think he's in Bali now. He's a partner in your company, A Cool Agency. And what you do is being a performance marketing agency, but I think you're much broader than that. You're not only running Meta and Google ads, but you're also adding a strategic perspective towards your customers and clients, which I really appreciate. And another thing I really appreciate with you is the straightforwardness. It's very un-Swedish to get super clear, crisp answers, which I want, right? I don't want to be surrounded by yes-sayers. I want to be surrounded by people that challenge the status quo all the freaking time.
You actually are the person that helped me to realize that this is our unique proposition, and there's bazillion of agencies out there now. Like every second person feels like they have an agency.
It's the most common business model in 24. It has to be.
Yeah, probably. And then I thought, like, you help me understand what's the difference, because what I realized when you said that is that, yeah, we do all these services, yeah, we grow the brands, but I realized that 80% of our time, we don't spend in the channels, like Meta, Google, email, whatever that is that we do, we don't spend it there. We spend in trying to figure out the next step strategically. Even you will know with the brand that you have and then we both work on, right? Is that we spend most of the time trying to convince you on doing some shit that is not even within the channels, or like it's more macro strategic, decisions that we need to make. And what I also realized, and I don't know why it is, I don't know if it translates because of us being 3 co-founders that are working on those, or that we got really lucky hiring the people that we hired. They are also very dedicated to what we do, because they always go the extra mile in trying to figure shit out. They don't give up, because I could say, fuck it. If the client says, oh, we don't feel like doing it, and I could just say, okay, you said it. You're going to be the one to blame if we're not going to succeed. But we always come back to the same shit, if we really believe and we convince. And sometimes, as you know, it takes 3 years to convince, some people to get shit done. But we just focus on that because we know what moves the needle. And it's not like little ads manager changes. It's not like Google little changes. It's not those things. It's the strategic thinking.
And since you challenge myself and our team in Miura on a daily basis to do X, Y, and Z to improve the ecosystem, I'm going to challenge you as well.
Yeah.
We're so stressed about executing this pitch deck. The fact that it had to be perfect because you had a vision and, you didn't get to that vision exactly as you imagined. And that was creating stress in your body. And this is also like from our relationship in the past, that a pattern I've seen, and something that is super common out there among especially young people in the dropshipping or e-commerce industry. They have so freaking high ambitions. I would say they have too high ambitions. I would say you have too high ambitions. How old are you, Arnas?
26 now.
You're 26. The stuff you've done so far is insane. The fact that it has to be perfect in a super short amount of time and nothing else is okay and you just have to get there, or the feeling is otherwise you will freaking die, it's not good for you.
I know. And before coming here to this podcast, I thought fuck, we should focus on marketing mostly. But I'll say one thing, because we always get to this point, but we will circle back to marketing. So everything that you said is beneficial to the client, right? And not beneficial to me as a person. It's beneficial because we're always going to work the extra mile and so on. But obviously there has to be a balance between that, and finding a healthy way of doing it. So for sure, but that's actually the number one thing that I'm trying to figure out. Because when you said 26, you achieved already, in some eyes, maybe some significant things, in some eyes not. And that's the thing, the comparison is the thief of joy, right? I'm very grateful because in Vilnius, where I live in Lithuania, I surround myself with so skilled, nice, strong values people, but also that are really successful, And basically in my circle, I'm the least successful person, and I have older friends, and then basically I have almost no friends in most of my circle that are my age. But if you compare to them and they say, oh, when I was 18 years old, I made my first 100K euros and so on, and then you feel like shit.
That can't be true. I mean, it is not true, because the thing is, you are comparing yourself with an unfair target group or audience or group of people. When you're 18, you have circumstances that 18-year-olds have. When you're 26, it's the same. When you're 38, 48, 58, shit takes time.
100%.
There's probably 1 or 2 guys that made 100,000 euros when they turned 18, but there's also 999.9 people that didn't. So you can't compare yourself to Bill Gates and Elon Musk, and whenever you're behind them or below them, you can't feel bad about it.
I completely understand that. Actually, I work with psychologists because I'm interested in the way that the mind works. I'm interested in, I have the fear and biggest desire, and it's the same one. If you change a little bit the formulation, is that I don't want to be in my dying bed when I'm old and realizing that I didn't live the life that I wanted to live. So when you are born, you start getting shit from your parents. Shit can be good, shit can be bad, but you're getting something that is not you. It's something that how they lived, the values that they had, and the environment. You get to school, you get the environment from your classmates and teachers, and they get some shit onto you. And for me, the goal is to get rid of all of that shit and understand who am I for real. Who is the person that was born and had none of that shit yet brought onto him, So that's why I'm interested in going deep, and that's why we have this conversation.
That is also an insane ambition.
It is, but it's not like I don't have the ambition to reach that goal. I believe it's the journey, and that you try to get closer to the whatever source or whatever that is. What I wanted to say back to the topic that we had was my psychologist. I had a conversation, or last week she recommended me to watch a movie, and I think it's called Disney the Kid with Bruce Willis. There's a grown-up version, and he meets his 8-year-old version. The kid, and he hates that kid because he's fat, he's like ugly, and blah blah blah, all the bad things about him. He's a loser. But the kid says to him like, you don't have a dog, we dreamed about having a dog. You don't have a woman in your life, and you don't fly planes. You are a loser. So the point is, when I was watching that movie, I was actually getting teary in my eyes because every time I was watching, I was seeing myself, and then that when I was a kid, I created an identity that, I have to be this and that. So what you're saying, is that super ambitious and reaching the goals and, being the businessman, blah, 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 being the best, all of those things. But then I realized the kid also wanted some other things, and just being childlike, enjoying the life, stopping for a moment, not always trying to push yourself on doing these things. But what I realized was, which now it's in progress now and it's fresh, but I realized that kid, if he would look at the version that I am right now, 26, he would be like, that's the coolest person I ever met in my life. And that would be me, myself in the future. Because when I was seeing, big chopper bikes, that are super loud and so on, I would be like, with my eyes like this, and I would look at them and feel like, I don't know, butterflies in my stomach. And now, like, I have my dream chopper bike, which is huge, and then...
What chopper is it?
It's a Indian chieftain. It has speakers, it has the bags and everything. And I traveled last year in Sweden and so on. That kid, if he would realize that at 26 years old, I have that bike, he would go crazy. And then if you add on top all the things, when it comes to business, and even that I'm in Sweden now, just flew for 24 hours to record the podcast, he would also go crazy thinking like, man, at 26, you are that cool, it would be crazy.
Fucking high five.
Yeah, exactly. But that would be the case, But now at this point, I feel like, I'm a loser, I still haven't done that, and, I still haven't created a financial freedom or all of these things, and I still have to chase something. But after watching that movie, realizing that I live my dream life that I saw as a kid, it's a process, but for me, it's slow down, everything is good.
We'll dive into the main topic of the podcast soon, and that we'll soon also, before that, present you to give the listeners a little bit of context. Yeah. I think my main point is some people need to be challenged to do more. And that's like most people need that. But when it comes to entrepreneurs, and including myself, and especially a person like you need to be challenged to do less. So you need to be challenged to lower your ambitions, to say no to things, to say no to opportunities, because your system doesn't need to be trained for more. It's got to be trained for less. And why? Because two things. Number one, it's nice if you live a full life instead of dying, early. I think most people align with that. And two, there is also a business value with longevity. If you go and ask Warren Buffett and ask him like what the impact is of him being alive another 20 years, money-wise, it's going to be insane. Because of ränta på ränta-effekten, as you say in Sweden. It's basically exponential growth, right? So a good example here is there's a well-known entrepreneur in Sweden. He made about 10 million SEK the first year, 1 million euros. Then he grew the business for 25 years. Now he makes 700 million euros in revenues. He's been profitable almost all the way, and he's only been growing by 30% year over year. And the guy is I think he's not even 50 or something like that. So like the impact of doing shit long-term is underrated. And the impact of doing so many things short-term is overrated.
You told me this, I think 3 years ago, when we just had a conversation, and you told me about this. You need to figure out how to do less, not more. And for me, it's stuck since then. And that's what I said. Sometimes we just have conversations with you, and then we don't talk for long or anything, but you say some shit, and that shit gets stuck with me for quite some time. And everyone will probably relate. You know that alcohol is bad, smoking is bad, not exercising is bad, sleeping little is bad, eating burgers is bad, and so on and so on. But sometimes we do these things even though we know that it's bad. So it's the same here. There's a lot of things that are not beneficial to you to think that way, to act that way, but it takes time for you not to only understand it, but to feel it deep inside of you that you don't even have a desire to do it anymore.
And Arnas, it's a pleasure because we always dive deep instantly when we hang.
Yeah.
I freaking love it. And I'm looking forward to a long lunch after this podcast session as well. To give the listeners a little bit of context, we talked about Kaya Cosmetics, we talked about Stronger, we talked about Mikuta, and you also worked with some UK brands that are really successful and been growing 2-3x over X years, and so on and so forth. You've also been on a podcast before, episode 107, so 107, that was recorded on the 5th of August, 2022. You worked at this, what was the agency called that you used? Sugatan, right, which was like the top performing agency back in the days that was training a lot of Europeans that later became kick-ass in the performance agency industry. And then you started your own agency with Domantas & Co.
And Ingrida.
And that's what you do today, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. So now they have context. And you've had an ad spend of above 100 million euros.
Yes.
That's ridiculous.
It is. But I wanted to come to this podcast and basically just say how it is and say how the industry is, because I know when you post, obviously you post in Swedish most of the time, but I see the names and the businesses that you invite and you talk. So the fucking thing I love about Sweden is everyone is, one, super well connected and everyone knows everyone and everyone knows what that person did or that person does and how they do it and so on and so on. And two, the entrepreneurship scene is like enormous. I don't know. I love that aspect. The point that I'm trying to make here is that I know many of your listeners, they can get scammed by a lot of marketeers and a lot of the things in the industry, a lot of the things that how they work. There is a lot of people, that post screenshots that, are just screenshots, and it's very easy to manipulate, and they build their credibility on that. So when you say 100 million, I know it's impressive because I know how we got to that point. I know what we've done, and I can tell you exactly what worked on every single brand, what was the needle mover that got to that point. But most of the people, and when you go on LinkedIn, there's a lot of people that say, oh, I spent 30 million on ads. I did this and that and that. In most case scenarios, I wouldn't take this number seriously when someone says and so on and so on. I know that I can vouch for it, and give reasons and arguments and so on and so on.
But I get it, because if you look at, unserious newspapers, they can take statistics and form them in a way to strengthen their thesis. And that's a quite simple thing. It's the same thing with e-commerce, right? So you have access to a bunch of data and you can be biased. So some of the data that you are looking at is confirming your theory, and some of the data you're looking at is against your theory. But as a human being, you want to be right. So you're using your bias to, and using the data in a way to strengthen your own theories, which not necessarily is the most rational thing to do, right?
And the thing is with marketing, I could tell you 10 different things about marketing and you're not going to know which one is true. I could say anything until we test it and it's proven to work or not work, you're not going to know. So when a person comes and says, I spent 30 million on ads, I know my shit. I spend millions, for the brands that I work with, and they could tell you anything.
Let's start there, because I have like 16 thoughts simultaneously, but let's start there, which is like people tend to have theories or theses or
hypotheses,
something like that about business ideas, about products that are high performing and products that are low performing, about website design and buy button colors and whatever. And, my own experience there is I've done a ton of shit in the past. Some shit went well, some shit didn't go well. And looking back, it's been super hard to identify what has and what has not. Could I have guessed what would work and not work? And the answer afterwards is no. I would not have guessed that the products that today are top sellers are the top selling products. I would not have guessed that the investments that turned out the best would turn out the best. It's rather a guessing game. What I'm saying is your opinion is worth shit.
There's one factor in it, what you said. yes, it is guessing, but 2, there is a probability of whether you are right or not on your ideas. And on what that depends, it depends on your experience, right? So imagine 10 years from now on, we'll have higher chances of creating a business that will work, or like a new e-commerce shop selling clothes, or not. Yes, you're going to have 10 more years of experience, and the failures that you had, and, the decisions that actually turned out to be shitty, and you're going to have higher chances of succeeding because of your experience. So the same thing goes to marketing. And the biggest issue, if there is one thing that the listeners of this podcast that have an e-commerce or marketers, even if they are agencies that are my competitors, so to say, just hear one thing. The most important thing now when it comes to marketing is focusing on the whole ecosystem of e-commerce. Imagine if I'm a marketeer and I say, I spent 30 million, I'm cool, I have done this and that and so on, so on, so on. And I start telling you ideas on hey, you came to me, as a meta expert, let's say, and I give you an idea. Look, you have to focus on creatives and do all of these things. The thing is, those ideas might be correct. And maybe those are the same ideas that I would be telling you. But the issue is that most of the businesses or agencies, e-commerce owners, they focus on individual channels expecting that this is going to be the answer. Oh, we need new traffic, so we are not able to bring cold audiences and acquire new customers and so on and so on. So what we need Meta or TikTok or so on and so on. So they hire a media buyer, and the media buyer might give good ideas. But if you haven't figured your pricing, if you haven't figured your whole funnel, messaging, offer, email marketing, bunch of those things as an ecosystem, stock levels, there is bazillion of things that, I could name. If you haven't figured those, that shit might not work on the front end if the back end is not figured out, right? And again, those ideas might be correct, but if you don't have an experience, you're gonna fail. I'll use an example because maybe it's more easier, with Stronger, when we started working in Sugatan.
And you were working with Stronger during the good days. I just want to add that.
Yeah, so they were making 2 million euros per year when we started working with them, right? We took them in 2 years from 2 million, I think it was 45 or 50, it was some time ago. It was enormous growth. We grew by 500% year by year, right? It was crazy. But the way that we grew, we only did one channel to them.
Meta.
That was Meta. And Meta was the biggest needle mover at that point because it was pre-COVID when shit was easier, and it was during the COVID when everything worked, So we were able to scale like crazy. In November, 1 month, we generated 10 million just within 1 month euros. It's just enormous and crazy growth. From that moment forward is that we were saying, we missed the good old days. You go to Meta, at that point it was called Facebook, you go to the ads manager, you look at the ROAS that it showed on the platform. Is it below 3.5? We kill. If it's above, we go above. The thing that we focus the most in the weekly meetings, I would present the shit that worked, and the shit that worked every week, it would be asses. So you would have pictures of women with good round ass from behind wearing Stronger tights. I would come to them and say, hey guys, again this week, the thing that works, asses. Let's create more content with asses. They send me content of new products with more asses and different backgrounds and shit. I launch them on Meta. I increase the budget. It increases the revenue. I increase the budget even more and decreases the revenue even more. And it doesn't decrease the ROI. So that was the simple good old days, It's not like that now.
So let me just summarize that, because now we've been talking about 3 things that are super important. The first thing is ecosystem. So before, during, when the Revolution Race blew up, when Stronger blew up, it was all based on one platform. Today, to be competitive today, you cannot only do Meta well. You also got to do Google well, email flows well, website well, CRM well. So it's an ecosystem where every single activity has its purpose. If they work well together, that's when you start becoming competitive. I think that's the first point. The second point is diversification. If you're super, super dependent like Stronger was on Meta, one platform, that's also a super big risk. So it blew up with Meta, it came to a certain revenue level, but if the algorithm changes, if the competition changes, if the prices on the platform changes, you're fucked, right? And you can see it instantly in the P&L on the bottom line. Diversification within marketing is super, super important. And the last thing, connected to what I said earlier, that you gotta be a critic towards your own opinions. To me, it's not about, being right or being wrong. And I think that is even dangerous. To me, it's rather about a probability game. So when I, for example, play poker, I never play poker, but if I would play poker and I would spend, let's say, 872 hours playing poker, I don't have to be right all the time. It's enough if I maximize the chances for long-term success, right? So the decision-making shouldn't be there to win every fucking hand. The decision should be to win the long game. So it's a statistical game. In investing, you talk about you don't have to be right all the time. You have to be right 51% or more of the time and be wrong 49% or less of the time. If you are that, then you're overachieving the market, right? So the question to ask is, how can I increase the probability of success within this specific action? For example, how can I increase the probability of success within this new product that I design, or this new category that I bet on, or this new ads content piece that I create? And that's a combination of stuff, right? It's a combination of data, but it's also a combination of gut feeling.
I agree with the last thing that you said. The second most important thing that I believe now is in the e-commerce world, and scaling and digital marketing, even I will say this, performance marketing, is branding. It always was crazy, when a performance marketer, well, not crazy because no one talked about this. No performance marketer in the past talked about branding. I don't even hear now people talking about this. But in my experience, and again, if we're talking a long-term game, if we don't talk about you found a dropshipping product, it started working really well for you, you started scaling, you found ways that work and so on. But usually these products die in 2-3 years. Now, if we're talking about Mikuta, if we're talking about Stronger, if we're talking about Kaya, all of those things, in order for performance marketing to work, in order for you to scale, is branding. And even as a performance marketer, you have to focus on it. Now, the biggest problem is, and you know this too, business owners often don't understand fully what is branding, and they expect that the branding is just like, how it looks like, the brand, the colors, the pictures, the content that you use, and so on, the messaging that you have, and so on. But it's not only that. And I'll use one example. There is one business that everyone in Sweden will know, and it's Ideal of Sweden.
You mentioned them.
Yeah. The point that I'm making here is that in Lithuania, the biggest e-commerce brand in Lithuania is called Burga. So burga.com. What they do is they sell phone cases. So the same way that Ideal of Sweden. When I was in Sugatan, and it was mostly my beginning of the career, I was looking at Ideal of Sweden as the top marketeers and the way that they did, and I copied the shit out of them and used everything in the clients that I worked and copied their strategies. They died obviously, they're still making money and so on.
They don't make money. They lost a lot of money last year.
Yeah, they don't make big profit, but they are still making revenues.
They didn't go bankrupt, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, in Sweden, you obviously you have the visibility of the finances of the company, so you are able to see them. The CMO of Burga is a friend of mine, and he had the presentation for the first time since whatever Burga, how old they are. They made last year 80 million euros. So 800 kronas, right?
Yeah, they made about 70-something million euros as they speak.
In 1 year, they dropped half of that revenue, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, 3 years later, they were at 30-something. When
I talked with the guy from Burga, the CMO, he asked me, and he'd been there, and grew.
Are they profitable?
Yeah, they are super profitable.
How profitable?
I don't know exactly, but I will tell you this, that they're building a 10 million euros worth of fulfillment center that's going to employ 400, I think, people or something.
Okay, so they're profitable.
They are very profitable and they're working really well. But anyway, he asked me, what do you think, made Burga work? What's the special about Burga? And I remember because when I would visit Stockholm and I would meet some clients, everyone would talk, and this was some time ago, about Ideal of Sweden, how they fucked up, how they messed up, and how they, failed at their business. And I said, and I went to check these numbers, and the one thing that I realized was branding, because that was exactly the same thing that we worked on Sugatan. We just focused on sales, just numbers, pushing that, and we were saying even this, until 30 million, you don't need to even think about branding. You can just focus on meta and then just scale. It's not the case anymore. And the brands that we did scale, and it was the 3 businesses that we work with, and we scaled them from 2 of the business we took from 1 million to 30 in 2 years, and then Stronger from 2 to 45 or 50 in 2 years. All of these 3 businesses started struggling. 2 of them, not Stronger, but the 2 of them, one almost went bankrupt, and the other one, I have no idea how it's going for them, but I don't think it's going well. Now, the problem is that they reached these marks, 30, 45, but they still haven't focused on branding. What happened, and this is what you said, is that let's say with Stronger, it was dependent on one channel Meta to acquire new customers, right? But then you said it's also risky because there could be a competitor coming in and taking that advantage. So with all the brands that I worked in the past, that's exactly what happened. So what happened is that there came brands that were levels below, while we were scaling. But what they did is they kept focusing on branding. So when they had the ads or whatever, it would be branded content. They would be everywhere. They would use the ecosystem really well. And what happened is that in 1 year, they reached the level that we are and started out-competing us. And the way that Facebook works or Meta is an auction. So you either spend most of the money or more money and you're unprofitable, so you're never going to be doing that, to have your ad at the very first scrolls. When you open Instagram, you scroll a couple times, you get an ad. The goal is to be at the very first, so because someone might spend 1 minute, someone might spend 5 minutes, so you always want to be at top. But the other factor is that Meta identifies what people react to the most, and then they push your content further, therefore it starts performing well. So the competitors started outperforming because their ads look better, but it looked more crisp. You go on the customer journey, and the whole funnel is just like a storytelling. All of those things started happening, and they outcompeted us. And our costs started rising, and we weren't able to compete. And then we started doing what? Discounts. And that's what exactly Ideal of Sweden did. They started doing discount-based marketing, where we just focus on deals and offers and all of that. And then it even cheapened the brand more. Now I'll go back to the Burger example. What they do really well and keep doing, they have 5 people working in-house that are community managers. But what they do is that 5 people full-time, what they do is they respond to every comment on Instagram and Meta, on everywhere. They reply to every story mentioned. They like the stories. They comment on the customer pictures. They respond to messages. They do everything. What happens is that when you go on any platform, whatever that would be, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, you see Burga everywhere because they comment on others. And you just, if you scroll, even you see that Burga commented, with an emoji or whatever.
It sounds like the hygiene factor in 2025 is ecosystem thinking, it is diversification of marketing, and it is a probability mindset. That's like hygiene factors in 2025 to be competitive. But on top of that, you got to do this complex thing called branding. Branding, or in Sweden you say stycka elefanten, in English that would be slash the elephant. Let's slash the elephant of branding. So what does branding mean in performance marketing? I'm thinking one part of that is obviously community. Answer every freaking DM that you get, do everything for your customer. But what else is branding? Can you split that up in 3 categories for us?
And one very important thing to mention is that when you talk about this whole ecosystem and expanding, and the way that I explained Burga does, it's not that you have to do everything until you make maybe 10 million euros, 20 million euros, 30 million euros. You can reach that with just having the branding, but the content looking better, having the storytelling and so on and so on. But you don't need to do everything, until that point. When you reach 30 million, and this too, you reach some certain ceilings. And actually, when I look back, most of the businesses that we scaled to the point of 30 or above, let's say between 30 and 40, all of them reached ceilings, and all of them didn't have branding, and all of them started scaling back. So that was for me the biggest lesson. So slicing the elephant, as you say, right? So there's a couple factors. So one, what I would do from the very first thing is that if your brand makes 10k euros per month or 1 million or 10 million, is that you have to focus on, and I was telling to one client actually this when we met, because they struggled for 2 years they were unprofitable. They weren't able to scale. They used a lot of UGC content, offers, and so on and so on, because they had the stock, they couldn't sell. It was going towards the bankrupt, and they came to us. And then in 1 year, we increased the revenue by 50%. After the 1 year, they started becoming profitable for the first time in 3 or 4 years. And 2025 started crazy well with them too. Now, I met them 1 year ago, and I said, it's 2 female founders, and I said, girls, what was the main thing that made you want to start a business? What was the thing that you thought is going to be different? What are we trying to create? What I want to say here is that there's a reason why you create these businesses, and there is a message that you want. And most of the time you lose that message over time. You don't communicate that because you focus on sales. You have reasons why you have to fulfill some promises maybe to investors, all of that type of stuff, but you lose the most important thing of why you started it. What's the reason that you wanted to be different? And I believe this is number one branding. Just that messaging, that piece of content, that piece of communication.
What I'm thinking is Amen Apparel. Do you know the brand?
No.
It's similar to Stronger, selling similar products, but I think the meaning towards the customers is much stronger. The community management is also much, much stronger. And the founders are still present and they're still full-time. And, so I think key to this, the message for the brand and the communication of the message for the brand or of the brand is very often driven by the founders. And it's a really big risk if the founders would, sell off for 5 million euros each in the company, because then they might get lazy, or if they quit. The point is, the founders are super important, and it's important to stay true to yourself when it comes to this specific freaking message.
100%, but there is a risk in it. And most of the time we have clients that focus on that, but they focus on it too much, and then they are becoming too protective of it, which then hurts the second part of branding. But it's not only, within like you or the business that we work with together, it's a very common thing. But the second part of branding that I wanted to mention is not only this messaging and protecting the brand and the storytelling and the way that all the content looks like, all of those things. But the second part is the community management, If you are like, let's say Burga, they are everywhere. We do it, for example, now them temporary, because we're helping them out because they're a huge business, obviously have resources, but they changing, people inside, and they asked for us for help during the Q4 and now until the March. We do TikTok and Pinterest. The point is that they are in every single platform. Do they know that Pinterest is 100% profitable to them? No. But what they want is that they want to be present everywhere. So no matter where you go on social media, you're going to see Burga. And you're going to see Burga in different light. On Pinterest, you're going to see one type of way, of content. You're going to want TikTok. You're going to see a bunch of creators talking about Burga, bunch of ads on TikTok, of Burga. And the content is going to be completely different from what they have on Meta, so Instagram and Facebook. And they're going to have a bunch of content there. So on YouTube, same shit. Everywhere you enter phone cases, you're going to get an ad for Burga. So Burga is fucking everywhere. Now, what it gives to you, if you don't have Burga phone case, you're missing out, because it seems like Burga is everywhere. Everyone is talking, everyone is having, and that is fucking branding, but from very different perspective. And that's what all the businesses that we talked in the past, they failed at it, because they focused on one channel. They didn't focus on the customer. They didn't build a relationship, right? And they looked at it more so as the hygiene. Oh, we need to reply to some comments that are bad, or we need to hide some comments that are bad, or whatever. And they didn't focus on the hygiene to build up on it. Burga did.
Exactly. So slashing the elephant is not only about community management and doing that really, really, really well. And it's also not only about content and doing that really, really well, but it's also about being present in many different marketing channels. TikTok, Pinterest, Meta, Google, and those are only the digital spheres for marketing, right? There's also a physical sphere for branding.
Quick point. This, what you just said, and being everywhere is not from the very beginning, because if at the very beginning you're going to do that, one, you're going to fuck up your cash flow, and two, you're not going to maximize the wins you can have. For example, it's definitely worth more investing on Meta, let's say at first, and optimizing email marketing and Meta, or like whatever the cold audience channel, that could be TikTok, that could be influencers. And then focusing on that if it works really well for you until you reach 10 million, 20 million, and 30 million. But if you are at 30 million mark and you're not doing that, chances of you reaching 50, 60 and above, I don't see that happening. Or in my career, I never heard anyone reaching that. Maybe back in the golden age of, 2017.
And let's keep that action for later, meaning what's the playbook for growth of a digital direct-to-consumer brand when it comes to 0 to 10 million euros, 10 to 30 million euros, 30 to 100 million euros, and so forth. But to recap really quickly. So again, number one, we were talking about ecosystem thinking. Number two, we were talking about diversification in marketing channels, diversification in everything, sales channels, product categories, whatever, to remove risk. And then number three, we were talking about probability mindset thinking, right? But let's get back to branding. Let's get back to slashing the elephant. To me, branding is kind of a new thing for digital brands. In the same way, the game of meta or the execution of meta was not standardized 5 to 10 years ago, but is standardized today. There is a playbook and you just got to follow it to be successful. Branding is the same thing today. It's not standardized yet. It's where you can be really innovative. And there is a lot of things that you potentially could do. And to me, a lot of brands are focusing on the wrong shit. An example is pop-up stores. Pop-up stores, you say that let's start a pop-up store that lasts for 2 or 4 weeks. It costs shit tons of time to plan, a lot of money of event agencies or whatever to execute, and then you shut it down. The revenue you get from that, the branding you get from that is limited. The investment for that is super, super high. So I'm just saying that, I think, and it's just an idea I have, I think brands in general are really poor at branding if they have a digital heritage and that they prioritize the wrong shit. So if you compare physical stores versus pop-up stores versus wholesale versus community management versus content versus whatever that you would call branding, what do you think people and your clients should prioritize?
Depends on which stage they are. If we're talking about stage of 20, 30 million, what you said is not necessarily bad. Like having a pop-up could, if executed correctly and used correctly, it could be extremely beneficial. Why? Because let's say you reach 30 million mark and you are a digital brand. So you are Instagram, Meta brand, right? And people just saw you from there. If you are able to have a pop-up and event managers, they invite a bunch of influencers, they invite a bunch of people, and then everything is very neat and beautiful. And then, it looks so premium, all of that shit. And if you hire really good videographers and shit, you make really good content out of it, what happens is that all of a sudden it's not only a digital brand, even if you do only digital marketing, but you show that and educate your customers that, again, creating a fear of missing out, FOMO, that shit, people are going and lining up and they're buying and then they want these products they touch. So you can have that, but at the same time, there is also a risk because then you can see the shiny object and you start chasing it. But being present in all the platforms. Now, it's not easy to be present on TikTok because, let's say Burga, an example, they have thousands of creatives per month that they generate for all the platforms. Thousands. Imagine how much time and resources that takes to fucking make. But that gives them ability to be present in all the platforms. And especially in TikTok, which is way more fast-paced and the creatives die out and you have to have a machine to support that. Now, and you mentioned how much money it takes to have a pop-up. So what's worth more? Creating these pop-ups from time to time, or investing money that you would invest in creating one pop-up. How much that would take, I have no idea. But then hiring a creators on TikTok and giving you the content, representing your brand in the most, in the best way possible that, they can. And you getting 100 pieces of creatives to use for TikTok organically and on. Obviously, I assure you it's going to be way more significant impact if you give me that 100 creatives and then I push them on TikTok and I spend the exact same amount of money. And obviously, it's going to be the bigger needle mover. It's going to make the significant impact, and it's going to push you to the different stage than the pop-up will. But that's the point, is that there has to be a balance. You have to create the story of your brand that, you have to create that fear of missing out. So using only digital content is not going to obviously work all the time. So having these pop-ups or opening the stores, it could be a good thing, but you have to select the timing, to do it. Sometimes it's just 10,000 euros decision for a brand that makes 30 million per year. 10,000 euros. Is that a lot? I don't think it is. With 10,000 euros, we can create shit ton of content and then push the channel that we haven't pushed and then generate traffic we haven't generated and increase the revenue by maybe 1 million in the long term. What will that do? That will give you even more money, to open the stores and whatever. But yeah, I'm not able to make that decision for years because of some reasons and so on and so on. There is a part in the e-commerce world where you have to balance, and I'm talking, from the perspective of e-commerce owners, agency owners, marketeers, and so on. You have to balance between the ego, between your ideas, between the probabilities, as you mentioned, and there's all of these things have to be balanced out to produce the best result. Now, the way that I feel confident and comfortable, talking with my clients, because I can tell them straightforward and say, this is shit, this is the bad way. If we're not gonna be doing this, we're gonna fail like all the business that I worked in the past failed. If you hire a person that then is doing shitty job, I will come to you and I'll say, they're doing shitty job we had in the past, the same managers coming saying the same things, and they fucked up the brand. So I will tell you these shits, but again, in the end, I'm just an agency owner. I'm not the final decision maker, and then what will scale your brand is going to be, on you to make the decision. Maybe I'm repeating myself, but again, if you hire a really good media buyer, but that doesn't have the view of the ecosystem, he's a really good media buyer and he does what he's best at. So he doesn't give a fuck how many emails we generated, how the emails are performing. Maybe it's better not to acquire a customer, but to acquire an email, because emails are converting so well and we don't need to spend money launching an email. So he doesn't give a fuck about that. So he will tell to you, we need more money to spend on Meta. We need more creatives and so on. So he will use that, and you will use a lot of your cash flow resources to allocate to that, but it's not going to work in the end because, again, you don't have ecosystem. So it's a bunch of things, obviously, at once.
The same takeaway again, which is, again, ecosystem, diversification, and probability mindset. That's like the baseline here for the discussion, right? And I think we have to be more crisp in the questions to get straightforward answers, because it also differs, as you said, for different companies, different categories, different stages within the company. Nu tar vi ett kort break från poddavsnittet. Hej Magdalena från Svea. E-handeln utvecklas ju i rasande takt och en av de mest avgörande delarna för framgång är ju betalningar. Hur kan företag skapa en smidig, en säker och en lönsam köpupplevelse? För det är här Svea Payments kommer in. Vad gör Svea för någonting, Magdalena?
På Svea Payments har vi en tydlig vision, och det är att skapa de mest smidiga och trygga köpupplevelserna både för handlare och konsumenter. Vi vet att varje transaktion inte bara är en chans att skapa en bättre kundupplevelse, utan också en möjlighet att bygga lojalitet, öka konverteringen och stärka lönsamheten. Vår kompletta betallösning är enkel att integrera och fungerar sömlöst oavsett om du säljer online eller offline, till företag eller till privatpersoner. Dina kunder kan betala precis som de vill med kort, faktura, swish, delbetala eller andra lokala alternativ. För handlarna så betyder det här högre konvertering, bättre kundnöjdhet och en betalpartner som aktivt hjälper till att driva tillväxt. För konsumenterna en smidigare och mer personlig shoppingupplevelse utan krångel.
Det här låter ju som en viktig del av en framgångsrik e-handelsstrategi, men vilka är de största utmaningarna som ni på Svea ser idag?
En av de största utmaningarna är friktionen i köpprocessen. Konsumenter förväntar sig enkla, smidiga, snabba betalningar, och minsta hinder kan leda till avbrutna köp. Det kan handla om att föredraget betalsätt inte finns tillgängligt eller kö till kassan i den fysiska butiken. Att konsumenter på något sätt känner sig otrygg eller osäker. Och vi hjälper handlarna att eliminera de här hindren genom att erbjuda anpassade checkout-lösningar med smarta betalalternativ och stark säkerhet utan att kompromissa med användarupplevelsen.
Finns det ytterligare eller fler utmaningar som ni ser?
Ja, men en annan stor utmaning vi ser handlar om likviditet och lönsamhet. Handlare behöver ha kontroll över sitt kassaflöde för att kunna växa. Här gör vi skillnad genom att erbjuda snabba utbetalningar och flexibla finansieringsalternativ så att företag kan optimera sin likviditet och investera i sin tillväxt.
Och det här är jättespännande. Vad skulle du säga är den största fördelen med att välja Svea Payments som betalpartner?
Det som kanske skiljer oss allra mest från våra konkurrenter, det är vår personliga service. Vi ser värdet i AI och automatiserade lösningar, men vi tror också att den bästa kundupplevelsen skapas genom en kombination av teknik och mänsklig expertis. Därför satsar vi stort på personlig kontakt. Våra kunder har alltid en dedikerad kontaktperson som kan ge ett skräddarsydd rådgivning där det verkligen behövs. Hos oss får du liksom inte bara snabba svar utan en partner som förstår dina behov på djupet. Och
det här låter som att ni verkligen kan hjälpa företag att växa. Hur kan e-handlare komma i kontakt med er på Svea?
Det smidigaste sättet är att gå in på svea.com/payments där du hittar all information du behöver och kan boka ett möte med oss. Det går också bra att kontakta mig, Magdalena Cesar, eller någon av mina kollegor på 020 67 67 67. Vi ser fram emot att hjälpa fler företag att ta sina betalningar och sin e-handel till nästa nivå.
Stort tack till dig Magdalena från Svea. Nu fortsätter poddavsnittet. Let's just start with that because I want to take 0 to 1 million euros, 1 to 10 million euros, 10 to 30 million euros, and 30 to 100 million euros. Let's take these stages and look at them from two different perspectives. One perspective is performance marketing, and one perspective is branding. I would guess that from 0 to 1 million euro, what you do is focus on meta only, because meta definitely scales to that level. And when it comes to branding, you focus on community management only, right? Because that is super successful. It can be run by the founders, yada, yada. What do you think about that idea?
I don't fully agree with it, because I would actually focus a little bit differently. So 0 to 1.
0 to 1. That's a good podcast name, by the way.
Yeah, 0 to 1. What's important there is that at first, you don't have money for meta. So you don't have the ability to test and find what works. It takes time. It could take 1 month. It could take 6 months. It could take 12 months until you figure out what works and you start scaling on it, right? But at first, you create a brand because you believe you created something that is not in the market yet. Something that is different. It could be a piece of clothing, but it has like a slight edge. There's something different.
60 pockets in a bag.
Yeah, anything that could be that is different, or that creates a different emotion, or you are a business owner and that you created it and you always felt that you couldn't find a piece of clothing that you liked, you know? Maybe that's a black t-shirt with a little text that says you're not from Paris and you're from Stockholm, you know? Maybe that's that, you know? But that's going to be unique to some of the people because it's unique to you, because you couldn't find and you felt to it. So there's messaging that you're trying to create and push. If you start with that, that means there's going to be some people that's going to relate to it. And your goal at first is to use resources that don't cost money. And that is organic content. That's maybe finding an influencers or ambassadors that also going to relate to your message. Maybe making deals, maybe giving ownership, maybe giving revenue share based partnership.
Product gifting.
Yeah, obviously that's a strategy, but I'm more so saying, you know, something you have to, product gifting is also could be expensive for your cash flow at first when you're not making money and you're not able to give a bunch of products away for 100 influencers and finding the 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 that's going to work, right? But what I'm saying is that maybe you just need to find ambassadors or ways how to scale without spending a lot of money because you don't have money to spend, right? So you cannot do meta at first. So at that stage, I would focus on that. I would focus on communicate this messaging, focus on content creation organically. Since the very beginning, I would focus on content and finding ways how I'm different and how I'm doing things better than anyone else. But then once you start generating the cash flow, let's assume maybe you hit the spot with some ambassadors, some content, you start generating some cash flow. What I would do is that I would set the lowest hanging fruits. So I would set Meta's retargeting ads to just capture the customers that maybe entered and give some reasons to buy, right? I would do email marketing from the very get-go. It's the, man, if I could say the number one, probably most underrated thing, it's the email marketing. For me, it's mind-blowing sometimes when some of our clients don't focus on it or they focus on it in a wrong way. They look at it as just like newsletter channel and communicating your message and so on, so on. It's just like crazy how much money is being left at the table. Like we had a brand that was making 40 and above million and they didn't focus on email marketing. They didn't have automation flows, which is like, imagine, general rule of thumb is that 50% of email marketing revenue comes from automation flows, 50% comes from the campaigns or newsletters that you send, right? So imagine not having automation flow. So you're missing half of the revenue you could potentially be getting. If you're making 40 million, and then, well, the co-founder that we have in Grillen, you know, so she is one of the best email marketeers. And I can say that very confidently. I know that email marketing channel is going to be covered and email marketing is going to generate from 30 to 40, sometimes even a little bit above of total revenue for the e-commerce brand. Imagine how much money is that. And imagine if you're not focusing and if you could just extend 10% more of that revenue to have an increase and have it optimized, it doesn't cost you any fucking money to send an email. You know, it costs a platform, but it's not a significant cost, right? So having email marketing, figure out, set up the automations, you know, done it the right way. That's the most important foundational level when we talk from 0 to 1. Once you start that, again, you start adding pieces. You start adding more, maybe for Meta. You start hiring maybe some people that could do these, you know, marketing initiatives and so on to manage that channel. And you just test little by little what works. When you get to 1 million, this is where it gets more interesting. The smartest option for you would be to come to a cool agency and then help us do the work for you. But if not, or what we would do is that then when you're making 1 million euros per year, you already figure out something that works. You figure out the products, the best sellers that you have, something that really works for you, that push the needle, move the needle. And then you probably have done some meta, or you have done some cold traffic from whatever channel you've done, and you find what moved the needle. So when we come in, we analyze, we research, we see what worked, we amplify it, we optimize it, and then this is where we are the most skilled, is, taking brands from 1 million to like 30 and above, 40, 50 we had in the past. Because this is where we are able to take something that worked for you and just amplify, scale. The number one word we use is scale.
All right, so I think the summary from 0 to 1 was great. From 1 to 10, it sounds like you got to double down on the shit that is working. There is brands out there, and this is a quite important fact. Christian in FTG, my company, he went to Turkey to visit factories. And during the factory trip, he found a supplier that was producing something like 200,000 pieces of one pair of jeans with one single print for one single brand. So turns out, because you can Google the size of different companies, right? And that company was making a few billion SEK in revenues. And about, 20-30% of all revenues comes from one freaking product. I think that is important because there is a scale, or there's a scale available for very few products and very few categories, if they are super high performing, to tens of millions of euros through one single marketing platform, which probably is Meta because it scales the fastest, right? So 0 to 1, organic shit and community management and, all that stuff that we talked about. 1 to 10, it's all about doubling down on the shit that works, and what works could be one single freaking tights with a certain print, and you just, maybe expand that product that works to 3 new colors while you double down on meta and probably also adds content.
100%. And also the very important thing that I would mention, and that comes to, again, the decision making you make when you choose the partners that you work with. So for example, we had a brand, I don't remember exactly the revenue that they came in, but let's say 7 million. So again, from 1 to 10 mark, it felt like they're doing everything okay. And it was Domantas actually who took care of that brand from the very get-go. And then the only thing we've done, because we did the test phase, and for test phase, we said, give us just meta. In 1 month, let's see how it goes. And then you make a decision for the client. In 1 month, we were almost doubling the revenue they were making on the back end, not on meta, on the back end. How? From 1 to 10, again, mark, is that previous agency didn't focus on the things that really work for them, or maybe they didn't identify those things, or they didn't utilize. When it comes to the way that we work, is that we work on amplifying and scaling. So finding what works and just scaling the shit out of it. So squeezing everything that is out of it. So what we saw is that they had really good content, really good videos, but they weren't just focusing on budget management.
What do you mean by that?
What it means is that it's just, we did meta. On meta, they weren't increasing budgets aggressively. Simple thing. What we did is we were aggressive as fuck, and then we utilized the thing that worked the best. So most of the things that we've done is we restructurized the meta, and as you said, there is no rocket science in that. If someone will come to you and you're going to go to an agency and they're going to start talking about you, oh, we are experts at meta because we use this strategy and set up accounts this way and that way. Fuck them, man. It's not the needle movers. You could have like shitty setup or a really good setup. It's not going to be the biggest needle mover. But what we did is we set up the account the way that we believe the best way. But the biggest needle mover was we were aggressive as fuck. We would double, triple, quadruple the budgets per day. And what we did is that in 1 month, we started generating double the money for the brand. Such a simple thing. And again, it depends what partners you choose. They chose some other partners. Those partners they didn't utilize, and maybe they would have went with them for longer and they would grew slower. What we did is that we doubled their revenue per day in 1 month. The reason why I'm saying this is that from 1 to 10, you're amplifying and scaling the shit that works. You identify the products that work really well. So obviously you're going to focus on them. You identify the content that works really well. So maybe you're going to double down on that and create another different variations of that content, explore different type of formats and so on and so on. But you're going to focus on, it's going to be meta and it's going to be email marketing. You optimize those two things. Email is going to be the channel that's going to bring you the profit. It's going to be something that's going to increase your lifetime customer value. Now, it's very competitive out there and it's tough to make money from the first purchase. So obviously you have to focus on LTV, lifetime customer value. You have to focus on AOV and all of those things. So what we're going to do is we're going to optimize the website, to increase the AOV, to increase the conversion rate, all of those things. We're going to focus on email marketing. So for it to generate and take all the money that is on the table from that, because it doesn't cost money. And then obviously we're going to focus on the channels that are bringing traffic and optimize them in a way that, we can get to 10 million.
Exactly. So I think now we're talking about 1 to 10, right?
Yep.
And we're talking about doubling down on what works. Yep. And what that means, I think, is identifying bottlenecks. Because, taking the 1 million to 10 million euros, it can take 6 months. It can also take 3 years. It doesn't really matter how long it takes. So doubling down on what works means that identifying that this is what's working, this adds content or this variation or this certain USP that you're talking about or whatever that is, you identify it and you have the freaking guts to doubling down. The problem here, if you grow the meta budget by 2% per day, you grow the meta budget, the spend, by about 2x per month. It's a quite good metric of thinking exponentially all the time, because small changes can have big impact in a quite short amount of time. And if you 2x the meta budget every month, the probability is quite big that this thing that is working really well is selling out. So now it's a supply chain problem, right? So then you have to identify the next bottleneck, which is supply chain. Make sure that early on identify this product is going to sell out at this point. I got to reorder it ASAP to make sure that the product is in stock, right? And then you scale maybe to 6-7 million euros, and then you identify, the ROAS is going down. Then you identify the next bottleneck, which might be content. Then you got to, increase the content output internally in order to, let's say by 2x, in order to push more content into the Meta platform, so you reach the 10 million euros. So I think the thinking in terms of bottlenecks and resolving them as early as possible is the 1 to 10 million euro playbook.
I agree. And obviously the stock is a very, very big problem when we scale, because again, our focus is to scale fast and rapidly. And when we find what works, we're going to utilize that again. We're going to squeeze all the juice. So obviously running out of stock is one of the most common issues. But again, if you have a media buyer that just does media buying and he does it maybe really well, he's not going to give a fuck about that, because he's just going to focus on what he sees on Ads Manager. If he sees something that's going to work, he's going to push that more. If he's going to see something that's not going to work, he's going to, turn that off. So the point of the way that we work is that we look at the whole ecosystem and we look at the stock levels. We give to some of our clients, for example, that have huge seasonality, right? So we come into them and they like, okay, we don't perform really well in the, other part of the year. And we're like, no shit, So we give guidance on creating products that gonna work. They have some ideas. Maybe we don't agree with those ideas on those products, and we just push and provide certain things, business-wise. So then, we become like partners, but not in the way that we are, external. We always push to have the communication with the founders and people to just figure out the solutions, to the business-wide decisions. But yeah, generally speaking, that is the mark, where you have to focus on those things. If you find what works, you start scaling. You have to not lose your cool. You have to not lose your head, and you're gonna need to project and understand, if I continue that way, like I need to order more stock. Some key scenarios we did with the brand that we doubled the revenue and we started scaling rapidly. What happened was that he was like, it's the July, and by August, I'm going to run out of stock that I planned for the whole year. I'm not going to have anything for quarter 4. So he had to figure out, how do I get more product fast, the same quality and everything. And he figured that out, and we fucking grew like crazy because he had the stock. So, but then in my eyes, that's more interesting to the founder, because they solve these big issues, and they leave something that they don't need to think about, like marketing, to the experts, So yeah, but that is the mark, I would say, up to 10.
Really cool. So now we have a playbook for 0 to 1. We also have a playbook for 1 to 10. Then the playbook from 10 to 30, I would assume shit becomes more complex now, because now we're at the size that is quite big, and it's not enough to rely on Meta only. It's also freaking risky to rely on Meta only. This is also combined with the fact that, your performance in digital marketing, ROAS, return on ad spend, might go down as you grow and as you increase your spend. So then I think content and content creation becomes much, much, much more important at some point as well. So how do you think about taking the brand to from 10 million euros to 30 million euros?
you're still doing the same things you did from 1 to 10 that we mentioned, and there is a big focus, but what you have to be focusing on, increasing the output. And the output is that if you created, one piece of content to reach, I'm just using an example, if you reach one piece of content per week from 1 to 10 million, then you're gonna need to maybe have 5 pieces of content to reach the 30. And I'm using random numbers, but you get the point. The output has to become way higher. Obviously, there is more advanced strategies than you use within email marketing, maybe more segmentation because you have bigger list and all of that. When it comes to meta, obviously you have to use different formats and more content to reach different customers and so on and so on. You really have to focus on website and website improvements to, again, because you already found what works, so you just have to scale. If your website is, let's say, converting at 1% and there is a possibility to increase to 1.5 or 2, so you don't change anything, you send still the same amount of traffic, but all of a sudden you make twice more profit. So this is a game changer, right? When you go to 30 million, you start expanding, your ecosystem thinking, and you start focusing on the things that work. But still, with Mikuta, we focus mostly on meta, email marketing, and Google to reach the levels that we reached, So still is possible from that. The way that I'm thinking, and I'm thinking this only because of the patterns that I saw of the business that I scaled, that at 30, 40 million mark, most businesses start to fail because they think we grew so fast, so it's going to go that way forever. It's not that you start making decisions at 30 million, but I believe you have to start making decisions when you are 15, 20, and slowly preparing to what's to come. Because then, as we talked, you have to focus on this whole ecosystem. You have to focus on all these different platforms. You need to start focusing on these things that gonna end up moving the needle and build on branding. So in my head, is that it's not only about the content output, but it's also about trying completely different formats. It's about finding influencers that, you could build your trust, because when people see influencers promoting the brand, again, it creates FOMO, but it also creates trust that it's a legit thing, because influencers or higher following, having influencers don't risk their brand of themselves to promote something that they should. We talked about all of these things, but I think this is where you focus on those things if you want to reach that level and move above it.
And I think different categories also kind of act differently, because the fashion industry is really, really, really freaking big. So there you can scale much further with, one marketing channel and fewer products, while other categories are much, much smaller. You have to implement these ideas into your own categories, whether you sell dishwashers or lamps or carpets or clothing,
I figured out in my head as we were talking what it means when I say that at 20 million mark, or since then you need to start thinking of those things. And the reason why is that you have to protect your brand. And this is what came to my mind, because what you said, even if it's washing machines, if you don't have the brand, to outcompete you, what it takes is to just offer better pricing for the similar quality product. And that's it. You're going to do the same marketing. Everything is the same, but you're going to sell it at a cheaper cost. The customer is going to see, and it's going to be easier decision. But in order for you to not be outcompeted for your competition, as Ideal of Sweden did, and all of these brands, is that you have to focus on branding and give reasons outside of the price point, outside of the quality of the product. You have to give this sense of community. Burg is such a good example, because they realized that, I don't know how they thought of it and what made them think of it, but what they figured out, they started hiring, and again, I might be wrong with the names or anything, but the whole idea is the same. They started hiring people from Acne Studios. They selling phone cases. They hire creative directors or some shit like this from big brands to consult them, or I don't know, work full time. I don't know how it was the setup. And again, but the point is that they focused, we're not selling phone cases. We're selling fashion. And in order to sell fashion, we need to think like, fashionistas and create collections and do this promo content like Dolce & Gabbana campaign would do, and they started thinking that way. So what they did, they started giving reasons outside of the price point, outside of the product, outside of the offer. All of that is important extremely, but there's also extra reason to give. So again, when you reach 30 million, if you focus on only one thing and you focus on channels that worked and the content that worked and that's it, you don't give any more reasons. So it only takes another brand selling similar product at a better price point to outcompete you. And that's it.
I love the collab that Axel Argato did with the speaker brand Transparent. So they basically took sneaker soles and molded them down to a speaker that looks freaking dope. And I think they only did 20 of them or so. These kinds of activities strengthen the brand. And I think, okay, so I will recap the 10 to 30 first. 10 to 30 is about continue to do what you do, continue to scale, but starting to think more long-term in terms of increase output. Scaling is increase output. So scaling, having the guts to bet more on meta, but also while scaling content, but also thinking long-term, because you will hit this roof that will, create a decline for revenues and KPIs, etc. So you will have to think long-term, and you will have to start doing more shit besides operations, which to me is strategy. And strategy is about marketing channel diversification. Let's bet on TikTok and Pinterest as well, or at least dip our toes in these channels. It's about scaling, collections and betting on the products that work well and making them in 10 more colors, or creating a new category where you have a high probability for success, right? So that is basically the 10 to 30. But then also on top of that, branding that you were talking about. And to me, again, the portfolio of branding activities you can do, physical stores and pop-up stores and whatever, I think a low-hanging fruit here is really super simple. It's community management, because it doesn't cost too much to hire one or two people that take care of the customers. It's not about customer support. It's rather, customer mentorship. It's much, much bigger than support. It's about hanging out with the customers, understanding the customers. And what they do is to make sure we post on all the different channels to be there for our customers. They make sure to answer all the customers' DMs and comments and stuff. They might invite the customers to the office. I think that is the lowest branding activation you can do at this size. While you also can create a store, but betting on a store costs at least 400,000 or 500,000 euros in renovation cost, and doing a pop-up is also super expensive. So obviously you might do this or that anyway, but you just have to prioritize the right things at the right time.
100%. And I would invite everyone to follow Burga as an example, because what they did, they didn't hit the ceiling. They didn't stop at 30. They were doubling and tripling year by year. They did many fails and so on and so on. But the most important decisions they made right. And they focused early on the branding, and they kept focusing on it, so the competition didn't outcompete them. It's different, very difficult business model, because there is new models coming out every year. So with stock management, it's a disaster, right? Because you have to have a bunch of styles, bunch of models, and all of that. But what they did is currently they have their whole fulfillment and product in-house. So they do themselves. So when the Q4 comes in, they hire double the people. So they have 600 or 500 people working for them, making the phone cases, and they are able to do a print on demand, but they are able to ship your product in a couple of days. They did every big needle mover decision the right way. And again, this comes to the experience, of the partners that you choose to work with, and so on and so on, because some people, went through it and saw that. So it's not only about hitting the ceiling, it's about making the right decisions at the right time. And that's exactly what you're saying, and that can prevent you from hitting those ceilings and continue scaling and continue doubling. And the goals that they have for this year is just like enormous.
I think a good example of, because now we're almost going into the discussion of 30 plus million euros, like how do you get above that to, let's say, 100 million euros or similar. I think a company that did that quite well was Kaya Cosmetics. And they did it really well because of great operations, because they, obviously they were really good at the content game and then the performance game through you guys, since you worked together for a while. They also started including, the mindset of ecosystem thinking, the mindset of brand thinking. They, started betting on new markets because they knew they would outgrow Sweden at some point. So they started betting on Norway and Germany, etc. Started making pop-up stores and physical stores and so on. Kaya Cosmetics history could be the same as, for example, other influencer brands that had a peak, that were printing cash, but then started declining, not 10%, but rather 30, 40%.
I don't think they are scaling as fast as they were. This is actually a good example that reflects the whole conversation we had. So again, since this is a public data and you could check in the magic website on Sweden that you have, this data available.
Allabolag.se.
Yeah, they made 16 million euros before we came in. And in the 1 year together with us, we went to 45. It's 3 times growth. What we did is we focused on Meta and a little bit of email because they didn't let us do much. But Meta. So we maximized the shit out of Sweden. We focused on Norway and other countries and so on. And we achieved enormous growth. But later on, I believe they hit the ceiling. And they hit the ceiling because they didn't focus on the right things, the right time, in the right way. Maybe they started decreasing the revenue, but they stopped increasing the revenue as rapidly, let's say, as Burga did, because they just kept making the right decisions at the right time. And I feel like certain things are getting undermined, like the thing that made you scale in the first place. So that gets undermined.
What we're talking about now is almost product market fit. And product market fit is not black or white, but it's rather, you could rate it on a scale from 1 to 100. If you are an influencer brand at its core, you don't necessarily need super, super mega strong product market fit in order to achieve strong growth. If the same brand, let's say Kai Cosmetics or GRF Avenue, would not have the influencers behind, how much revenue would those brands make today? And my assumption here is it wouldn't even be close to the performance that they actually had. So it's like you're a pro skier and you eat drugs to perform better. It's unfair to compare. So my thesis here is that, some of the influencer brands don't have an insane, highly competitive product market fit. There is brands that do not have influencers behind them from start, but that just have an insane product market fit. And, if you combine that insane product market fit with a great execution and the strategic thinking that we've been discussing, the chances of that brand hitting 100 million euros is much higher than an influencer brand that has a lower product market fit with a big ass 10 plus million euro influencer behind it. The reason is because it scales to a certain level and then it doesn't scale through the influencer anymore. An interesting fact though, and this is totally a side topic. So there's also influencer brands that have been founded in other categories, let's say the food category. And the thing is, the distribution there is different, right? So if you start ketchup company or a pasta company or whatever as an influencer, but you don't own the distribution, if your brand has, great branding and is a great product, you might get into all the big food chains in Scandinavia instantly almost. So then you can grow your freaking pasta company from 0 to 500 million SEK in revenues in 1 fucking year. And it happened, and I know which one it is. I'm not sure if I can say it because it's a big influencer brand here in Sweden. There is a risk to D2C, or not a risk maybe, but a limit if founded through an influencer because you own the distribution, and the distribution makes that you will probably hit the limit when the influencer's reach hits the limit, right? And then you have, the rest of the growth has to come from product market fit and so on. But if you, through the influencer, only get into the distribution channels that in Sweden would be ICA, Coop, Hemköp, Willys, all those big stores in Sweden, and they basically remove some other pasta shit and add your pasta thing there, you can achieve insane growth in a super short amount of time.
I 100% agree with it. But when you were talking, I was thinking still from my world perspective and, digital world and performance marketing. So does anyone in Germany give a fuck about Bianca Ingrosso? No one gives a fuck because no one knows it, right? So when you go into Germany, again, obviously you have to have a really good product. And if you don't have a good product, you might achieve success short term in 5 years, 3 years, whatever. But if you have any, desire to grow and reach, 100 million and so on, it's not going to have, the product is going to be shit. So that's for sure. But when you're going to Germany, it's not only about product, but also playing with your ego, because it's not going to be that it's going to be as easy as you found an influencer in Sweden, you grew in Sweden, and then you go to Germany, and then you take such a huge market, you get a big influencer, and you have expectation that it's going to work in Germany the same way. It's not, and it didn't, and it's not the way to go. You mentioned one thing, and then you said in comparison that you grow the brand with the influencer marketing, in one market, and then entering the new market is extremely difficult. If you make the right decisions, so you grow in one market, using influencer, you are able to have more profitable cash flow for sure because you're using their audience. So it doesn't cost as much, right? But if you don't use that cash flow into approaching a new market the way that there's no influencer, but focusing on all the right things as content, channels, email marketing, all of those things, it's not going to succeed. And we saw that in the past. It all comes to the decision making. And it's not only about choosing the right partner, but it's also, if you don't have money, you then look for someone that can guide you and mentor you. If you don't have that, then instead of launching an ads, and spending 1,000, come to me and I will consult you for that 1,000, and I'm going to help you create a strategy and make the right steps for your business. And again, because it's always going to be decisions that you make, that's going to help you scale or quickest.
And Arnas, we're running out of time, and that is so bad because we could talk for hours.
Yeah.
But I still want to talk about the plateau topic because I have a bunch of screenshots from this site, allabolag.se, where you can see all the company metrics, financial data from each company in Sweden, which is awesome that we have this transparency in Sweden. But there's companies such as Djurf Avenue, I Can, I Will, PS of Sweden, Sweef, Ideal of Sweden, that all, had a rapid growth, then they hit the ceiling, and then they started to decline. So my question to you, Arnas, is basically when you start hitting this 30 million euro plateau, when you start seeing the KPIs declining, when you start, and also potentially I hope you're not adding costs because you are betting on growth. That means death, right, for the company. Because if you add costs and think you would grow, but then you don't grow, then you're fucked because then you can't afford your employees. The question is, if you have rapid growth, if you hit 20, 30, 40 million euros, if you start plateauing or see indications of plateauing, what should you do in order to avoid the plateauing and in order to continue to grow?
Every situation is obviously different and different reasons why you're plateauing. But if you start struggling with the cash flow, what I would do, I'm going to tell from my perspective, as I am the person that scaled to the 30, 40 million mark, right? So I know what the businesses start doing. They start hiring, bunch of people that cost a lot of money.
C-level executives at 160,000 SEK per month.
You know what the problem is? Is that most of those people, and I can't tell you how many times it happened, they come from corporate businesses like, let's say, Foot Locker, or like some corporate businesses that grew, and they come, and again, I'm a marketeer. I know I took the brand from 1 million or 2 million to these 30, 40, 45. So I know exactly what made it work, and I know exactly what made it scale. And they come in and they start bringing their ideas, and I know that their ideas not gonna work. When you reach that plateau, you have to come back to the focus on what made it scale in the first place. So let's say if it's content on Meta, you start focusing on content on Meta and finding new ways. If you're presenting the same format, the same way, the content is the same, and you have been seeing the content for 3 years, and the products change and everything changed, but the whole idea is the same, right? So what happens is that for customers, it starts feeling boring, nothing new. You are a brand that, sold the same shit, 3 years ago, you're selling the same shit again. So you always have to play with different formats, different type of content, and evolve yourself, not stagnate yourself as a business owner, right? But the other part is that if all of those things, you start doing and you kept doing and it still, makes you plateau, again, I would look at branding and I would see if I'm communicating something that is outside of my product value. Is the brand saying something? Is there a mission behind it? Like let's say Stronger. To this day, for me, it's unbelievable that they created a brand called Stronger and they didn't utilize the message of being stronger, where they had all the possibilities of saying woman empowerment, anything, because it's stronger, be stronger with us, feel stronger, and so on, so on. Or they did it in a cheesy way where you on ads say, a headline would say, feel stronger with Stronger. It's not that, it's create campaigns, like something that reflects that. So the brands lose this part and don't evolve. And again, it's super easy for competition to outcompete you because they give the reasons outside the product. So again, if you're plateauing, this is where you have to focus. Hiring a person that is really skilled at TikToks, how much is going to cost you? 2K, maybe 3K per month for them to create shit ton of content. Why wouldn't you use that? As you said, it takes 400K to open a store and the pop-ups and it costs shit ton of money. So why wouldn't you invest in 5 creators that can just, increase your output drastically on the platform that you haven't been present in the way that you want, and then reflecting your branding. Do that, The same goes for Meta, the same goes, and, again, with email marketing. Some of the brands, when reaching that level, they start focusing on, everything to look beautiful, and there would be storytelling and so on, so on. We have one example that the client declined all the ideas that we had because they didn't accept, because I don't know, it didn't feel up brand. But with one idea, they decided to give us a chance to test it. And it was one simple idea. Send an email that is just plain text. So there is no graphics, beautiful by now, shit like this. Just plain text as Bjorn would send to Arnas, right? So just the brand sends to the customer. I don't remember what it said exactly, but the point is it's just plain text. That email became the best performing email of the year. It increased 34% conversion rate, on the email marketing. Now, what that means is that focus on that shit if you're plateauing, Stop fucking caring of them protecting the brand in the way that, we cannot do this. Just focus on these little needle movers. And if I can increase your email marketing revenue, that's going to be more profit. If I generate a little bit more profit, maybe I can hire those 5 content creators from TikTok and open channel on TikTok. Maybe I can take 5% of my spend from Meta. Even again, if you're a 30 million business, you're spending millions on Meta. So I take a little bit of Meta and put in TikTok. Maybe TikTok starts working. Again, you can change the course. Just focus on the things that actually matter and its performance, and not going outside of the box and thinking I need to open the stores and do that. Fuck, if you're plateauing, not making money, just focus on what works and not try to invent something new and hope that will work.
And I love the idea of the email, where you basically, then it's not email marketing, but it's rather a message to the community. So then what does that mean? Well, it means that you start talking to your community. You start talking to your customers. They start feeling heard, right? That is almost community management. That is pure branding, right? Brands maybe don't have the guts to grow. And I'm not talking in terms of brands, as a company, but I'm talking about brands from a brand perspective, because a brand has to evolve over time. And if the ecosystem, if the company grows, the brand itself also has to grow. So the brand cannot be what it was 3 or 5 or 10 years ago. It has to evolve over time. And it could mean that when you hit that ceiling, you have to start talking to your customers. You have to send messages per email to your community instead. You have to hang out with the customers in your physical store, answer all freaking DMs, and maybe do what Jerf Avenue was, which was throwing a party in fucking New York, for your customers. Evolving the brand is probably the main thing that is required, combined with the shit that we were talking about, probability mindset, diversification of revenue channels and marketing channels, yada, yada. And then mainly maybe ecosystem, understanding that this is a full ecosystem that has to collaborate together, And then on top of that, you almost have branding. And I think the last takeaway I just want to say is that the performance marketing team cannot be the same team as the branding team, but they have to collaborate super close together. Just like, in Stronger, the marketing team was present during product development. So the marketing team was present during product development with the supply chain team, right? That is super important, because the supply chain team has to understand what is required of this product, so that the marketeers can market it, so that they can create content around it and create ads around it, so it fucking sells, And this is exactly the same thing. The brand team has to closely collaborate with the performance marketing team, so that the ecosystem together can grow.
Exactly.
Now you got a tear in your eye. No, just kidding.
That was beautiful. It's like, in order for you to achieve that, it's either you hire in-house and you build on that, or you hire an external partner. But again, if you hire an external partner, I would say 9 out of 10 partners not going to focus on the shit that you just said, And then for me, when I know that we focus on that shit, it's very difficult then to sell, because everyone had bad experience with agencies because they don't focus on that shit. And for me, it seems like I am lying when I'm saying that, we're going to be doing that or this and focus on those things. So your summary was awesome. And when I look at my laptop, you can't even imagine how many things I have there written about the strategies and case studies and examples and all of that shit that I didn't mention yet because we ran out of time. But I think the conclusion is, the one that you said, is that you just have to focus on these macro things. I could go in the micro things and tell you these little strategies and this and that worked, and so on. Your summary was awesome. Well, I could add a lot to it, but if we have limited time, that's what I would leave listeners to it.
Let's just do more podcast episodes because we have a lunch reservation with the team, with David, Simon, Hanna, Fredrik, you and I, and Nils, obviously. So that's going to be awesome. Arnas, it's a pleasure having you in Stockholm as always. If there was just one single thing that you would have to recommend or would like to recommend to the podcast viewers and listeners, what would that thing be?
Reach out to me. Reach out to me with whatever that is. I had many people reaching out and I offer free advice because in my head, I am passionate about the e-commerce, and scaling the businesses. But what I'm more passionate about is helping people avoid bad decisions, scammers, whatever that might be. Creating an e-commerce brand or whatever business that you have, for most of the people, is dream come true. When they start, they believe it deep in their heart that they're creating some value to the, people that they want to give. And I want to support that. You mentioned the example we talked on the phone, the Essence. I think the girl that was on this podcast too, not so long ago, right?
Jonna.
Yeah. And you mentioned that she scaled like crazy. And I remember she reached out to me when she was very little about potentially working. I think after the podcast we did the last time, we didn't collaborate because it didn't make sense at that time for her to, with the cash flow things and so on. But we talked, and then seeing how she grew and found a way and her grew, man, that makes me happy, really. When you said that, that made me really happy, thinking that that's what life is about, is that if you are able to tell your story or give piece of yourself through the business that you're trying to create, that's fucking beautiful. And I really want to help more people achieve that and not end up dying out.
I totally agree. And Jonna's episode was launched beginning of March. So check out Jonna Gustafsson from Essence. She scaled on TikTok. She's super profitable. She just bought a house in Spain. So it's freaking inspirational. I highly recommend that. If you would recommend one person for the podcast, who would that person be?
I knew you were going to ask this and I didn't have anyone in my mind to talk about that.
How about the Lithuanian company, the phone case company?
I don't think you're going to be able to get them because they are not sharing and not in a very private setting. But if you would get them, man, if you would get either the CMO or the CEO of Burga, man, that would be just the biggest value bomb I think you could ever get on this podcast, even, better than anything I could say. I would think because it's so inspirational. Like, again, I follow them too and yeah, it's awesome.
I'm going to set up an email spam letter, for 160 days to see if they if they come. If people want to get in touch with you, Arnas, how do they get in touch with you?
You can go to acoolagency.com and find ways to reach out there. If reaching out directly to me, you can go to LinkedIn and I think you're going to have my name in the podcast name or the description somewhere. So yeah, I think those are the ways.
Amazing. Thanks again for flying into Stockholm to be on the podcast. Let's go and have a lunch now. Om ni vill komma i kontakt med Arnas så gör ni det lättast via show notesen, så finns hans kontaktuppgifter där. Vill ni komma i kontakt med mig så gör ni det lättast på LinkedIn. Sök på Björn Pålman Spenger så finns jag där. Glöm inte att ratea podden i alla appar där du kan ratea podden, det vill säga Spotify och i podcaster. Där kan ni ge oss en 5-star rating i respektive app. Det skulle uppskattas sjukt mycket. Och glöm inte att följa oss i alla plattformar. Vi finns på TikTok, på Instagram, på LinkedIn, på alla plattformar du kan tänka dig. Så gå in och följ oss överallt, så vore det sjukt kul. Jag vill också tacka dagens fantastiska sponsor Svea. Svea är ju typ Sveriges, kanske Nordens mest underskattade checkout-lösning. De har ju en extremt smooth checkout med sjukt hög konverteringsgrad. De erbjuder extremt många betalsätt och väldigt hög flexibilitet i sin kassa. Vill du läsa mer om det här, gå in på SVEA så kan du öka din konverteringsgrad och äda alla Swish som finns i typ hela Norden och världen. Jag vill också tacka Michaela Dorch som klipper podden och Fredrik Ankarsköld som producerar podden. Glöm inte att prenumerera. Stort tack för att du har lyssnat. Vi hörs igen nästa fredag klockan 06.00. Hej!
Hej!